Bible Conference in 1878, which defined those tenets which considered fundamental to Christian belief. And of course, we talk about the fundamentalist modernist controversy, etc., that subsequently took place. This is someone called Mahmoud Mamdani. He wrote a book called America, the Cold War, and the Roots of Terror. The title is Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And he said that I have doubts about the usage of the term fundamentalism outside of the context in which it arises, which is the Christian context. My real discomfort with using the two interchangeably, political Islam and Islamic fundamentalism, is that fundamentalism is a cultural phenomenon, and I want to zero in on a political phenomenon. Political Islam arising in the context of oppression, in the context of decades of sanguinary warfare, in the context of tyranny, in the context of mass murder, in the context of genocide. It is a reaction, but that came very late in human history, as late as the latter part of the 70s. It's important that when we define each other as human beings, that we need to be sensitive in terms of the terminologies that we use in applying to each other. Otherwise, again, we fall into the trap of the secularist enterprise. That's what the secularist worldview wants us to accept. You fall into that trap and you become a slave to your master. And if you want to be true liberated, true liberation lies in maintaining an interpretative relationship with your faith meaningfully, in the sense in terms of which you apply the terms, the passages, and the divine parameters in the context of reshaping 21st century society. So, in conclusion then, in accordance with what Martin Luther King Jr. says, we need to sometimes take positions which might not be popular, introspective positions, self-critiquing positions, but take them because it is right. I'd end with a verse of the Quran which says, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. And it simply means that when truth hurls itself against falsehood, falsehood perishes. For falsehood, any form of falsehood, is bound to perish. Thank you very much for your attentive hearing, and God bless you.
Thank you, Yusuf, for your presentation. I'd like to call upon John Gilchrist, born in Boksburg, lived in Benoni most of his life. He spent his time in high school in St. John's College in Johannesburg. He obtained a bachelor's law degree at the UNISA, and he practiced as an attorney, notary, and a conveyancer in Benoni. Married to Rosemary, his son David and George, involved in Christian outreach to Muslims for nearly 40 years. Written 11 books on Christianity and Islam, publications translated and published in 20 languages, published in plus minus 15 countries. He participated in debates with Ahmad Didat, Shabir Ali, and other Muslims over the years. Also authored Designed for a Purpose, a book on science and evolution in relation to God's purpose for His creation. I'd like to call upon John Gilchrist to take the floor. Thank you, John.
One of the privileges I have every now and again is meeting someone I haven't seen for about 20 or 25 years, and that's Mr. Ismail Kalla here this evening, and I wanted to say what a privilege it is to cross your path again, Ismail. Also, Yusuf, who's become a very good friend of mine, a man I've grown to respect very highly. Thank you for the opportunity for the debate this evening. Really good to be able to share a platform with you and with all of you here this evening. Thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see so many Christians and Muslims sitting together at a point where we're speaking on interests that affect both of us. I think that's a tremendous thing here this evening. It'd be very good for so much of the rest of the world if I could just see a gathering of people like ours here this evening. Yusuf has spoken just on the Muslim distrust of Western secularism and even of Christian missions and other things like that. and has been advocating various ways in which two could cooperate together and to recover the spirituality and to recover the faith that ultimately he feels is threatened by some of the forces in the world today. I'm going to speak to you. I'll come back to respond to some of the things you said, maybe in my talk, certainly in our reply. But I want to speak from a Christian point of view on the distrust of the Christians towards the Muslim world. What are the things that Christian world as a whole, particularly in recent times, feels about the Muslim world that it distrusts, that it doesn't like, and that it feels it's threatened, and so on. Because as Yusuf could say, as Muslims feel threatened by Western secularism, well, I know how many Christians that I speak to or listen to from time to time who feel highly threatened by Islam. In fact, I've even been asked at times from Christian churches, and they know my connection with Muslim people and being involved in Muslim outreach, Mr. Gilchrist, we'd like you to come to our church and come and speak about Islam. And I've said, fine, and I've had certain ideas, and then they've said, no, we don't want you to talk about that. Come and talk to us about the gevaar van Islam, the danger of Islam. And I said, the only danger that I know about Islam is that Christian people don't grow to love Muslims and to appreciate them and understand them and reach out to them as they should. That's the only danger that I do. I know. I don't see, quite frankly, any threat from Islam to us at all. But what I do hear, and I'm not speaking for myself here, but what I hear constantly is the following refrain, that Islam seems to be an inherently violent religion. That I hear often. And people always ask me at most churches, why are Muslims so violent? Why are Muslims so aggressive? Why Osama bin Laden? Why Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas in Palestine, and so on, all the different things, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt? Why all the hijackings and all the what have yous that we hear about from day to day? Once in a while, I get a question like this, which I got in a church at Witbank recently. Is Islam inherently violent? And that's a question I find much easier to answer than why is it violent? Because as you look at it, I know the Muslim world, I know Muslim history, I know Christian history, and I see things in a very different perspective. It's very easy just to judge the moment for what it is, and to judge everybody by what you see in the moment without seeing the history behind it, without seeing the causes behind it, without understanding the background, and particularly from a Christian point of view. And Ismail touched on this, Yusuf touched on this as well. From a Muslim point of view, the sort of tendency to stand on an ideology and become so self-righteous about your own position, and you just point fingers at the other side all the time and blame them for everything that's going wrong in the world. And I found that Christian people also, get scared because what they see of Islam is usually what they see on television. And what I always see is Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, not knowing what the Muslims are saying. And they look at this and they say, look at these rabidly fanatical people, they're getting all worked up. What are they doing? Are they threatening us? And I've said, calm down, just saying that God is great. Shouldn't have a problem with that. Christians believe that as well. That's all the words mean, by the way, if you don't know. And I also know the Quranic texts. People have often quoted to me, from a Christian point of view, Quranic texts that appear to teach that you can freely slay unbelievers wherever you find them. There's some very dogmatic statements in the Quran to this effect. Yusuf this evening has quoted others that talk about there being no compulsion in religion and things like that. And the other thing I hear often, and this is probably the last one, but I hear it from Christians around me continuously, why in the Muslim world, if this is just a certain element of Muslims that are being so fanatical, or to use the word that Yusuf doesn't like, a fundamentalist, why do the Muslim people as a whole keep quiet? Why don't they stand up and express themselves boldly and say that they don't agree with what's going on? All right, I'm hoping to give you a bit of a different perspective this evening. Firstly, as a Christian, I know exactly what the New Testament teaches about the Christian faith, and I'll come to that at the end of this little section. But for me as a Christian to say, as I often hear Christians say, ours is the religion of peace. Jesus was the Prince of Peace, whereas it is Muslims who are so violent and who are so angry and everything else. Well, two things strike me, and the other one is that people say God would never want to use violence at any time to further his own interests in religion. And I hear Christians saying that, who should know their own Bible better. The two things that you find, these two, the second one, to just mention these texts from the Old Testament, every Christian knows or should know that at the time when the Israelites were called out of Egypt through Moses, went into the land of Sinai for 40 years, and then went into what was then the land of Canaan, and there were the Jebusites and the Hittites and all the otherites that were there, and these were all peoples who were given to pagan idolatry and to every other form of occultic worship. And the Lord God said to them, when you take the promised land, and I brought you out of the land of Egypt to go in there and take it, but when you do so, Moses said to them in Deuteronomy 7 verse 2, you must utterly destroy them. You will make no covenant with them or show any mercy to them. And then in Deuteronomy 20:15, in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy them. And that is a clear indication to any Christian in our own Bible that the God of heaven at times has seen it in his interest in taking a people that he called his own, to whom he'd given his covenant, the people of Israel, and allowed them to use extreme violence simply to sustain the integrity of the community, the belief of the community, the faith of the community, over and against threats that were coming from other nations. Now that has an effect on me. It makes me moderate any kind of attitude towards Muslims of saying that God would never use violence in the process of religion. I sit and I say Muslims can find grounds for that in the Christian scriptures if they want to. The other side, the other thing is, why are Muslims, today so apparently violent and aggressive? Well, if I go back 1,000 years, I read Karen Armstrong's book, Holy War, some years ago. And it's a book that compares the modern age with the times 1,000 years ago. And the Christian Crusades that started then moved into a peaceful Muslim world, and a Muslim world that at that time was waging no jihad or anything against anybody. In fact, after the time of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, in fact, once they had conquered the Muslim armies, the known world around them, North Africa and elsewhere, there was no further violence at all for centuries of any description that could take the word jihad until the Crusades came. And the Crusades came because the Christian world reacted. And I want to mention this to you, especially Christians here this evening, to get a correct understanding of this. They reacted against what they saw as an aggressive Muslim onslaught that had dispossessed them of their lands in Africa and parts of the Middle East. And even though it took place 2 or 3 centuries earlier, it didn't take too much to rise up the spirit of revenge and say, right, now we go in and we go and reclaim what we had originally. And they went into Israel, what is Israel today. When they conquered Jerusalem, even Christian records say that they slaughtered everybody they found there, and they, Muslim, Jew, whoever, and the blood flowed in the streets. That's what the Christian records say. So please note that what you see today with Muslim world is paralleled in Christian history. In fact, and I have to say this because I know it's true, I'm merely stating facts, that I haven't seen anything that Al-Qaeda or any other Muslim organization is doing today. It wasn't being done by the Christian Crusaders 1,000 years ago. In fact, they could have learnt a few things from them because they're so similar. Almost every atrocity I've read about has got a parallel 1,000 years ago. And what that tells me is to look at why Muslims in recent times, since about 1979, before that, 1978, the Western world didn't even pay attention to Islam. But once Khomeini came, and once he became the leader of Iran, then from that moment over, the reaction came. And that's what it was. It's been a reaction, to a large extent, because of 200 years of colonialism, domination of the Muslim world by colonial powers. In fact, through the 18th, 19th centuries, well into the 20th, something like 85% of the Muslim world came under Western domination. And that's when the secularism began to creep in. That's when the colonization came. That's when the things of Muslims react, because Muslims are very concerned to have their lifestyle, their way of life of Islam carefully preserved and not invaded. And that's when that came. And looking at it, you can see again that what's happened in recent times has been a reaction also to the constant influence of the internet, of Western media, and things to the Muslim world that are threatening their way of life, and also introducing so much of secularism and some of the horrible things that come with secularism. And just to conclude here, one reason why the Muslim world keeps silent, and I know this because I'm just speaking facts again, I'm not pushing a point one way or the other, is because they often feel threatened from within their own world. People like Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood and others not only threaten, and Taliban not only threaten the outside world, they threaten their own people. And in many parts of the Muslim world, you have religious police that strongly police the behavior and the conduct of Muslim people in their countries. And I know that there are literally millions of Muslims in the world who don't approve of the violence. They tell me that, the ones I meet, don't like what they're seeing, but sometimes scared to speak out purely because of the fear of reaction from in their own world. Now, what should the Christian response, because I'm here standing here as a Christian, what should the Christian attitude to the Muslim world be? And I have a very strong conviction about this. Having just tried to put the whole current situation into context, my answer to that question, is Islam or are Muslims inherently violent, was no. And in fact, what happened in Egypt recently and what's happening in the Muslim world today is a very good example of this. You've got leaders like Mubarak and like Gaddafi and others who, whether you think they're good or bad or whatever, they've been there too long. Just like Robert Mugabe has in Zimbabwe. You allow a leader to run a country for 25, 30 years, the power goes to his head, and you know the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what the people of the countries are doing is simply wanting to get rid of them. And in Egypt, while the Muslim Brotherhood, which in many ways can resort to violence, can be aggressive at times, has made little impact, once the people as a nation, and they did it peacefully, they did it by way of protest, they did it without violence, managed to remove Mubarak completely. And that tells me, and I can see that the Muslim world is not, even in its history, if you study the history of Islam, it's not inherently violent. Muslim people are a people of faith and belief just as we Christians are. But now what should the true Christian attitude to Muslims be? And I look at it particularly in the world today, and I see the following. Firstly, when I was in Durban, living there many years ago, I gave a talk at the Durban City Hall, similar subject to this, Islam and Christianity today, and some of the Christian pastors who were there didn't like what I was saying. And they got hold of me afterwards, and they were somewhat aggressive towards me, and that I was too soft on Islam and so on. And one of them really got gunning at me, and I won't go into the details of it, but when I said to him, yes, but I said, but don't you realize that Jesus Christ, from a Christian point of view, came into the world to lay down his life for every human being on earth, and that the Christian attitude to Muslims can only be what it is to all other peoples on earth, and that's an attitude of genuine love. And he said to me, he said, yes, he said, but Muslims don't make it easy for us to love them. And my reaction to that was, well, I'm not aware that God has made it easy, or I've made it easy for God to love me. I'm talking purely now as a Christian within a Christian context and where I'm coming from as a Christian. I know myself. I know the depth of rottenness within me. I know just who I am. I know in the sight of the Almighty God, whose righteousness I know and understand, that deep within me there is not much that's going to stand to my credit as a human being and as a personal individual. And yet I do know that God loves me. And I know that he loves me with all his heart, because the Bible tells me so, because I can see it in the way that he has dealt with me in my life, and I can see it in many other ways. I can see it particularly in Jesus. And the one thing I know is that this leaves me with only one attitude that I can take to every other human being on earth. And this goes for every true believing Christian. It's got to be literally rooted in our being. The believing Christian cannot have anything but a disposition of love towards the outside world. Simply put, the desire to benefit the world at large. Not to get the advantage over it, not to put it down, not to fight back eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Every time somebody does something to us, we get self-righteously aggressive. We want to fight back. No, that's for everybody else. That's not for us. I've said this before. Some of you will have heard me say this morning. I tend to say it in every talk like this. The cross of Christ takes away my right to dislike anybody. That includes Robert Mugabe. That includes anybody that we might not like so much, Julius Malema, you name the people around here that we don't think are the kind of people we really want to rule our countries. I've got no right to dislike these people. None at all. My own minister of our church in Benoni said last week, he said, asked our church, he said, how did you react when you heard that Osama bin Laden had been killed? And he said, well, my reaction was simply that I regretted it because I used to pray for him and I can pray for him no longer. That might sound novel, but that can be the only Christian attitude to the world around us. Once we believe as Christians that Christ died for us and cleansed the road for us and opened the door for our forgiveness, our salvation, and the heavenly destiny, the only thing that goes with that is that we have to lay our lives on the line for him as he laid it on the line for us. And then we lay it down for the world and never against it. If I can put it in simple language, many people think to this day in religion that to be for God is to be against everybody else. In other words, that only those who see my point of view and are where I am in my belief in God, they're the only ones that I agree with, the only ones I'm comfortable with, they're the only ones that I'll fellowship with. The rest of the world is at enmity with me, therefore I am against it. We can't be. I don't know, other religions may be able to think differently, but the Christian can't think differently. We are for God on behalf of everybody else. That's the Christian position, always. It's like the Comrades Marathon. If you have to ask what's the difference between rugby and the Comrades, they're all competing against each other. Well, it's simply this. In rugby, winner takes all. In soccer, winner takes all. Manchester United win the league today. What did Chelsea get for coming second? Absolutely nothing. That's the way sport is. It's the same when the Sharks play the Bulls. You know, I mean, yeah, one thing Yusuf and I have got against my friends Johan and others, we're both on the same side when it comes to rugby. We support the Sharks. And when the Sharks come here, I come here to Loftus to come and watch them play. And I would be unashamed to tell you that's the only time I come to Loftus. I've got an affection for the Blue Bulls, but I always say things kom uit die bloute en die blou bulle het uit die bloute gekom en dus kom hulle so blou is. Anyway, that's just the way it is. But that's just fighting each other for supremacy. That's how rugby, football, everything works. Look, in sport it's a good thing. In wars and battles can never be a good thing. But the Comrades Marathon, why do you think so many people, thousands of people run the Comrades Marathon when in the past someone like Bruce Fordyce was running and you knew he was going to win because he'd won for the last 7 years in a row? Well, people don't run the Comrades Marathon to win. Maybe a few of them do. Only 10 people can get gold medals, and you usually know in advance who those are likely to be. The rest of them, the thousands of them who run it, run to finish. And that's the big difference between football and rugby on the one hand and simply Comrades Marathon on the other. Everybody in the Comrades Marathon is running in the same direction, running to cross the line, running to finish in time, not to beat other people. They don't care who they finish in front of or after. They'll get a medal if they finish in time. Now, I see the whole of the human pursuit of God as the same. That every single Christian or Muslim, as I look across the world, I can only have one eye to every single person. And that's not to say, I look forward to the day that I'm in heaven, and now when you thrust into hell, now I can really prove that you got it wrong. No, nothing of the sort. Just simply this, the desire that we should